You guys asked for it, and it's a tough one, but we're going to dive into the Aurora theater shooting.
Right. Definitely a heavy topic for sure,
For sure.
but a really important one. And, what we're going to try and do today is kind of unpack everything surrounding it.
Yeah,
Not just the events of that night, but the lasting impact it's had.
absolutely. And, for those who maybe aren't as familiar, just to kind of set the scene, it's July 20, 2012, midnight premiere of The Dark Knight Rises, packed theater, everyone's excited.
Right.
And then, the unthinkable happens.
And this was at the Century 16 Theater in Aurora, Colorado, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think for many people, this marked a real turning point in how we talk about gun violence, mental health,
Oh, absolutely.
all of these things.
Yeah, this case brought a lot of those issues to the forefront of the national conversation.
For sure. So maybe we could start with the perpetrator himself. We've talked about this before, but oftentimes the profile of a mass shooter is someone who's maybe been on the radar of law enforcement or has a history of violence. But this case was different, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really challenged those preconceived notions. James Holmes was a 24-year-old former neuroscience grad student.
Which is just mind-boggling.
I know, you wouldn't necessarily look at someone with that background and think potential mass shooter.
Right. You think brilliant mind, contributing to society.
Exactly.
And then to have this happen.
And the scale of the tragedy, 12 people were killed, 70 injured.
Which is horrific.
At the time, it was the highest casualty count in a single U.S. mass shooting.
Which is, just another layer of what makes this so impactful.
Absolutely. And I think what really struck people, apart from the sheer scale of it, was the level of planning involved.
Right. It wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment thing.
No, not at all. We're talking about an arsenal here. Holmes had a Smith & Wesson M&P 15 rifle, a Remington shotgun, 2 Glocks, and over 700 rounds of ammunition. And it's not just the weapons themselves, it's the way he used them. He set off tear gas canisters before the shooting.
So creating chaos and confusion.
Exactly. It wasn't just about the shooting. It was about maximizing the terror and the damage.
It's just chilling to think about.
And the premeditation doesn't stop there. His apartment was booby-trapped with explosives.
It's like something out of a movie.
Right. Like he was trying to create this whole diversionary tactic for the police while the shooting was happening. This level of planning. It was something law enforcement hadn't really seen before.
And it forced them to adapt,
Yeah.
right? After this, security measures at theaters, at public gatherings.
Oh, absolutely. It completely changed the landscape of security in this country.
Yeah. And of course, you can't talk about this case without talking about mental health.
Yeah. That's a huge part of the story. We know Holmes had a history of schizophrenia, and that raises so many questions.
Like, could this have been prevented? Were there warning signs?
Well, and here's where it gets really complicated. Holmes actually sent a notebook to his psychiatrist before the attack.
Wait, really? Detailing his plans.
Yeah, it was full of his delusions, his plans for the shooting, everything. But it arrived too late. Just imagine if it had gotten there in time.
It's almost too much to think about. But it also brings up those questions about patient confidentiality.
Right, exactly. Where's the line between protecting a patient's privacy and protecting the public? Could something like this have triggered a different response, legally or ethically?
These are questions with no easy answers, really.
No, they're incredibly complex. And then, of course, you have the trial itself, which started in 2015.
Which was a huge media event.
Oh, yeah. Everyone was watching. Holmes faced 165 charges, including 24 counts of first-degree murder. He was found guilty on all charges.
So justice was served, in a sense.
Well, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole, but the jury couldn't reach a unanimous decision on the death penalty.
Right, I remember that being a big point of contention. What do you think that says about this case?
I think it reflects the deep moral and ethical dilemmas at play here. To impose the death penalty, you need a unanimous jury. And even with all the evidence, the horrific nature of the crime, there was still this debate.
About whether he was fully responsible for his actions.
Exactly. Given his mental state, could he truly comprehend the gravity of what he did? Was he capable of making rational choices? These aren't easy questions to answer.
And I think those questions are part of what made this such a turning point in the national conversation. We couldn't just look at this as a simple case of good versus evil.
Right. It forced us to confront these uncomfortable truths about mental health, about gun violence, about the systems we have in place to prevent these kinds of tragedies.
And those conversations are still ongoing today, aren't they? We've seen so many mass shootings since Aurora.
Yeah, and each one reopens these wounds, these debates. The fact that Holmes used an AR-15 style rifle, the Smith & Wesson M&P 15, really put the spotlight on that particular weapon.
Because it's become so prevalent in mass shootings?
Exactly. And it raises questions about accessibility, about what kind of restrictions should be in place, if any.
And then, of course, there's the mental health aspect. We can't ignore that.
Absolutely. After Aurora, there were calls for increased funding for mental health resources, better access to treatment, ways to identify individuals who might pose a threat.
But it's such a tricky balance, right? Because you don't want to infringe on people's rights.
It's a delicate issue. How do we provide help to those who need it while also respecting individual liberties? There's no easy solution.
No, there isn't. And I think that's one of the key takeaways from all of this. The Aurora theater shooting wasn't just a senseless act of violence. It was a complex event that forced us and continues to force us
to confront these really uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about our society.
And to ask ourselves some tough questions about how we move forward.
Precisely. And I think that's a good place to leave it with a question for our listeners. How has the Aurora theater shooting and everything we've talked about today shaped your own views on these issues? On gun control, mental health, personal safety? It's a lot to process, but it's a conversation worth having with yourself, with your friends, with your family. We're all in this together, and it's up to all of us to find solutions.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So please reach out to us on social media. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, we always appreciate hearing from you. It's through dialogue, through sharing perspectives that we can start to make sense of these tragedies and hopefully prevent them from happening again.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining us today for this really difficult but important deep dive.
Yes, thank you for listening.
We'll be back next week with another topic, and we hope you'll join us then. Until then, take care.
Stay safe, everyone.
And have a good one.
Bye.